on the civil society and workforce. Okay. You heard Madeline a little earlier today. Her panel members, Edwin, why are you sitting down over there? Are Edwin Morris and Shelley Glass was not able to join us. So I have asked Dr. Rosemary Dumont to join us. And we have Dr. Don Weeks and Victor Pavona. Am I missing it? Did I miss anyone? And Madeline was right. I have to acknowledge when I learned something from Madeline. She told me 30 minutes was not enough time, and she was right. So I'm going to turn this over to her.
Even though 30 minutes is not enough, that's all we have. I'll try to stay very close to that time frame. This particular stakeholder group is made up of two groups. One is called civil society, and the other is called workforce. You probably know what workforce means, but civil society may not be quite that clear. So I'm going to ask you by a show of hands, how many of you use your public library on a regular basis? How many of you contribute to charitable organizations on a regular basis? How many of you have a driver's license? You know what civil society is. Okay? Did I get it a little better? All right. I'm going to ask the panelists now to introduce themselves. And I haven't had a chance to talk to all of them to tell them what we're going to do, but I'm sure that they will want. I'm going to ask you to introduce yourself, just your first name, so it's easier for us to communicate, and to name the constituency that you represent, because we have two here, and why you are representing them. Okay? Now, I'm Madeline, and I'm going to be here today representing the knowledge worker. And I'm going to do that because I have spent the last 7 years researching what it takes to really help that knowledge worker be a good lifelong learner.
I'm Don, and though I worked with Denise at Kent State University as a faculty member, I'm here to represent one of the civil societies or groups in our civil society, namely religious organizations. I do research in information religion and have a previous career in that area and ongoing interest and involvement. So I'm trying to represent that group.
I think that's not on.
Right now? Okay. I'm Rosemary, and I'm a retired faculty member at Kent State. However, I'm still very active, and I'm representing what I call the have-nots, which are those who do not have access to the Knowledge Society in the way that we have talked about this morning. I come at that from, I'm actively involved with the Fulbright program, and I'm working with a university in Uganda that is just trying to get established. And from that, I am becoming aware that have not means have hardly anything at all.
Hi, everybody. I'm Edwin. My position here is in a understanding of my experience rolled up into the last few years military service. In Southern Arizona, my anticipation is to build a knowledge management nonprofit that particularly their mission is to focus on nonprofits. Because I see that there, in the societal strata, a lot of these nonprofits are like small businesses trying to stay afloat. And I think what the benefit can add to their operation is through knowledge management to help that societal factor that they're trying to address.
Good afternoon, I'm Victor. Actually, as part of the Small Business Development Center, every one of these organizations listed up there are our stakeholders. We interface with every one of them, so in some degree, we'll be representing all of them and hopefully be able to represent them well.
We may be missing a mic up here. There used to be 3 up here, and there's only 2 now. Oh, okay, you've got it. Never mind, we've got it. All right. We've heard a lot about this complex world we live in with the problems. It used to be that in business or in our work, we could retain 80% of the knowledge we needed to do our job. Today, that's down to 8%, and that's not because our brains are less capable, because our jobs are so much more complex. Research has shown that task switching loses productivity. Research has shown that when we are constantly interrupted, we not only lose productivity, we lose intellectual capacity. In fact, on the basis, let's see, I think it's something like 10 IQ points. Now, I don't know about you, but I don't like to lose 1, let alone 10. Leaders use different technologies across the same organization. Yet 2-year-olds can use iPhones and iPads. And the younger generation sees social media as a source of knowledge and a tool for sharing knowledge as well. Very different, and yet our organization is struggling with governance and policies around the use of social media. All right. In this world, how could the Knowledge Science Center provide services to your constituencies to help you? And I'd like you to answer it by linking what you would find of value from the center and how it would address a particular issue of your constituency. So we really begin to make those linkages. Who would like to begin?
I don't mind starting. Since we are interfacing with all of those stakeholders, one common denominator that we find in our day-to-day conversations with, whether it's academic or it's a specific for-profit business or organization, is they all have individual parochial interests. Each one of them has an interest that is directly related to them. If there is a way that this center could create a common parochial interest to tie all those together, it would certainly make the interface in the community significantly easier. To Neil's point of view this morning regarding the intelligent cities, every one of those organizations is within the city with their parochial interest that now needs a common interest. And if the knowledge network can do that, that would be a significant benefit in addition to what we do.
I think the center itself would have to establish itself as a model of what the future is in knowledge handling, knowledge development, knowledge distribution, in order to provide a nucleus of what could be, to show organizations of any size of how knowledge should be developed, and I just really hate using the word managed because it becomes a cliche for everything, but to develop the transference of knowledge platforms to build behaviors from. And I say behaviors because that's really what I see as the weakest link in any knowledge exchange, is building the perceived behaviors the organization holds out towards its people to have a duty to that knowledge, that intellectual capital.
So you see that the platform that would be created would not just be a platform for delivery or accessing or collecting, but actually create behavioral shifts.
I think we have to exemplify what should be to break out of the mold of what is.
Before I let Rosemary in, I want all of you to keep note of these great ideas that are coming up, because I'm going to ask you a question when we get through. This is a test.
I think that the biggest contribution that a center like this could make in the environment in which I'm currently working is a database of expertise. There is great need for both have-nots to know who have and be able to assess that. And I'm talking about people as well as resources. And there is a great need for resources that are not expensive. And so to have some kind of evaluative process as part of this database would be extraordinarily useful for those who are really clamoring to move into this knowledge economy and have enormous challenges to do so.
I can see it now. How many stars do you give this expertise?
And speaking of faith-based or religious organizations, I think maybe there are a couple ways the center would relate in giving and receiving. So in the receiving end, these faith-based organizations are composed both of the professionals who administer them or act as clergy or something like that, but also most of the membership of them is very effective. People just like us from various walks of life and degrees of experience and training and understanding. And so, and also they are rooted in a particular community, and that could be a geographic community like a neighborhood, which physically they are, but could also be an ethnic or language community that they serve, or something like that. So these organizations are a great source of information for the center in doing other types of work or trying to understand how the nature and the community and how it functions, or in introducing people who are doing research or businesses that want to understand how to better serve their communities into who are the players in this community whom you should know in order to be successful. So if they have a knowledge of that on the ground. So they can be a provider of information to other activities that the center might be doing and projects it might be doing. On the giving side, the center can provide some of this training that Rosemary was describing, which can be in all kinds of ways, like a webinar, an in-person workshop, or a speaker, or it could be in materials that are available on the web or in other types of resource or data that's available that these organizations can then learn from in order to better handle their information needs and their knowledge sharing needs and that sort of thing within. Many of them don't have the language of knowledge management and training in it, so they may need it at a certain elementary level, although some people in the organizations may have it quite well. So I think the center can be both a giver and receiver for these types of organizations.
Rather than pose another question to you, I'm curious about your reactions to the thoughts that each of you have had about the services that the center could provide. We talked about knowing all the agendas. That was not your word, that was my word. That's a rather interesting one. Building behaviors you talked about technology. It's interesting. You talked about technology, and I automatically went to information technology. And yet, there are many technologies inside of technology, especially for like creating behavioral shifts. And Rosemary talked about database of expertise.
I think one issue that we have to talk about is information policy. That it's not only the technology, but how we conduct ourselves is very much related to what I would call these soft issues that really define how we can interact in this environment. Some parts of our society are much more open about sharing information than others. We have all kinds of laws and legal regulations that really frame how we can behave, and that we have to attend to that, and keeping track of that is an enormous challenge because rules and regulations change almost daily, it seems, and it's very hard to attend to it all. So if this center could provide some awareness and provide information so that we know how to behave and what regulations are coming up and how we need to respond, I think that could be very helpful.
Rosemary, what regulations around what issue?
Oh, I'm talking about laws and regulations around information access. The whole nature of the internet is up for discussion right now, and who's going to control it in the future. All of these things certainly have a major impact on knowledge management, and we need to be very attentive to these things as we move forward.
I'll just address a knowledge gap that I've noticed over the years is that in a transitional state where an individual comes into an organization, builds a repertoire of understanding, comprehension, and then exits the organization, that's usually a scaled up type of effect for most folks. So that expertise that becomes developed over time, I think the challenge is for any organization is to understand how to extrapolate that quicker at the front end, at the uptake. So that forces the actual organization to push information, and I'll go back to behaviors, set the behavior for that individual, understand their role as an organizational participant, that they have to exchange knowledge. It's not an option. That has to be spoken up from.
You know, it's interesting. I work with companies that often ask me to work with them in creating mentor programs, coaching programs. And the ones where I know there's going to be success is when they say, and the mentor should be learning from the mentee, right, or vice versa. So, which is exactly your point, I think.
While we're discussing what we are currently doing, meaning the knowledge network which exists today, and it's based on what's happened in the past. Potentially, what the Institute organization structure might be looking at is what should we look like 5 years from now, or 10 years from now, whatever technology might exist at that time, and how we intend to deal with it, or should intend to deal with it at that time. When you spoke of the millennial generation, when you spoke of collaboration, they're not interested in mentors at this point, if that's what we can figure out. They're interested in collaboration. They bring an enormous amount of knowledge because of their technical expertise on how to get that. So 5 years from now, how we cope, probably a terrible word, but how we cope with the millennial generation might just be a significant challenge of this organization.
Well, I hope somebody else here has a comment about that. I think that's just very exciting.
Yes, I think that's, well, it's the other half of the showing behavioral models and it's a challenge to all organizations. We've heard some statistics already today, and certainly in the religious communities, the leadership that's in place there is wondering, well, who will be leading 5 years from now, and how do we prepare them, and what do we learn from them to make a good transition?
I have one more observation to make. It seems to me that knowledge management, however we define it, cannot be too far ahead of those who use knowledge. When I think of, say, one of the groups that we mentioned this morning were the elderly, and if we think about choosing a medical plan, for example, and how difficult it is, there are 34 different plans for Medicare recipients in Ohio. And how do you choose one? And it's all online, and we have many people who cannot utilize this information, even though it's there for them, because they don't have the expertise to do so. And we need to be very attentive to those who are in our own society who just have not caught up and probably are not going to. And what are we going to do about them? And they're a growing number. And we have many technologies that provide us wonderful information if we should use it. How many of you use all the features on your cell phone? We create features that seem really cool, but we don't need them, or we don't want them, or they're too much. And now we have products which say we were going to make your life simpler, not more robust, not more information. We're going to give you less information, and people like that idea. So we need to be very careful about the fact that we want to provide more. Maybe we need to indeed think about providing less.
And that kind of highlights for me is just customer care. What does the customer need? And it's not, and you hit it right on the head, is that I bet you it was probably 15 years after being in the military that I actually saw what the VA benefits were. And I was like, holy mackerel, they got a whole book of stuff here. I'm like, wow, look at that. You know, and I've pushed this as an instructor for the military, is focus on what you don't know. And if there's enough element out there to push in the personnel of any organization, is focus on what you don't know, because it's easy to get complacent with what you do know, because then that builds the parameters of what the reality is. And in my case, and until I saw it in print, I had no idea I had all these benefits. I didn't know. I'm sure somebody told me somewhere in a briefing somewhere with some PowerPoint that I zoned out on. But the point is that I think you have to actually scale it to your audience. Just like in learning delivery, you scale the message to the audience. So that requires knowing your audience.
That business of learning only in context. I never thought about retirement systems until I got it. I got that. Rosemary, did you have another point? Yeah. All right, we've heard lots of ideas. What I'd like to do is give you, as the audience, some time to just talk through yourself. What are some ideas that you've heard here of activities that the center could provide? And I'm going to give you only 3 minutes. Yeah, 3 minutes to talk with one other person. And then, depending on time, we'll have some call-outs from the audience in terms of where you think, what do you think are the most important, or perhaps it stimulated yet another service that you never thought of, now that you see it from the perspective of civil society. Is it clear what I'm asking you to do? Okay. I'm going to set my... Oh, and by the way, the folks on the webinar, you can do the same exercise. That's the signal. Great use of an iPhone. Okay. I love it because the conversation hasn't quite finished out there. But I'm going to ask you to sort of wrap up, and I think we probably would have time for at least 3 people to comment on something they learned, a new idea, a question they need to ask as a result of this discussion. And what I will do is try to repeat it so that the webinar folks can hear it. So who would like to say it first? Yes. How could the research of the sensor help the capabilities? Make sure I say this right so it goes through the mic to get to them. How can the research capabilities help your constituents? Yes. Is that enough? All right. Second comment. Yes. Is there a role for crowdsourcing? And if so, how would you focus that? Excellent. Yes. Okay, I'm going to summarize that to say that libraries should be one of our constituents here, and maybe they should be even in the room, because they are a key source of knowledge. And how can we partner with them to get resources and more research? Interesting questions. In London, they did a study of precisely that. They called it the archives and libraries, because they're museums. All 3 of those are together, and they partnered with business to see how, in fact, they could use those resources to assist business. There's a wonderful story that comes out of that, where the folks in New York had to reinstall all of the water systems, the infrastructure in the city, because it had degraded so badly. And the group said it's impossible. The man who was responsible for it decided that he needed to inspire his team, and so he arranged to have his strategy session done in a museum that happened to be showing a display of NASA that did the impossible. And believe it or not, York did what they had to do in the time frame, because everybody was so inspired simply by being in the place called a museum that was honoring NASA, that had done the impossible. Great point. Okay, we actually have time left, and so I have asked the group what questions they would like to have me ask. So I'm just going to ask them to repeat those questions, because they are just dynamite. So I hope you all remember your questions. Rosemary, let's start with you.
The question I asked was whether having a specific Ohio focus for this center is appropriate, considering that knowledge management is a global issue. and that we sort of discuss this up here and say, well, this might be just a model that we would sort of set in place initially. It would be a microcosm of something that would expand. But I think we need to keep that in mind, that it would be a start with something that would be growing, and that it would not continually have an Ohio focus, because frankly, even in the discussions we had this morning, it's much broader than that.
My point was understanding a consensus amongst us of what we would not want to see this become. Based on our past experiences, knowing how efforts were taken and then whatever, went off a cliff somewhere, the bus got stuck, whatever the issue was, it became something that we thought was less than what it could have been. So I think having a good list of what we don't want would help drive the bus.
Listening today, the question arose in our mind relative to all of those stakeholders, and this is a contrary view for the moment, is the assumption that everybody in that stakeholder group really cares about what we care about and what we're trying to do. And potentially we need to test that model or test that assumption. And that should be, in our view, one of the challenges of the organization.
Question would be, how can the center help us to achieve our goals in terms of understanding, managing the knowledge that's needed for its success, while retaining and respecting the values of the participating organization. Values are quite important.
And I'm going to have the last question. And that is, how can we bring the youth into this discussion from the centers and in the centers? Because we really want them to be not only a part of this, but to just become curious about their ability to learn, because we want them all to be knowledge seekers and lifelong learners.
Trust them.
Trust them, absolutely. Thank you, panel, and thank you all.